Hey Roman, I hope you're doing really well. I miss seeing you. I'm happy that I can teach another lesson for you today. Today we're going to be focusing on writing, more specifically dialogue, and how important dialogue is in our writing and how we can use it to tell a little bit more about our characters' personalities. So for our writing piece, we've been using the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series to help us get some ideas on how we wanted to write our journal for our narrative piece that we've been working on. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about what dialogue is and how we can use it in our writing.
We use dialogue in our writing to add detail, relive a scene that played out, show our characters through interactions, and a lot more.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and look at this example down here. So this part is not dialogue, but the speech bubbles here are. So when we use dialogue in cartoons, we use these type of speech bubbles. So this guy says, "Is this seat taken?" And Greg says, "Yes, yes." So see in his writing too, he has the exclamation marks, but he's also using his hands, kind of waving them quickly to show that he really doesn't want him sitting there. And that's actually a form of dialogue too, because we know when someone's doing this, they're like, "Oh, don't do that, stop, stop, stop." So that's also an indication and a way you can use dialogue in your piece as well. It doesn't always have to be words. It could be images, it could be like a sigh or a laughter. That's all dialogue as well. So for this lesson, we're going to be using the Diary of a Wimpy Kid Roderick rules because we're actually going to be comparing these two characters here. We have Roderick and we have Greg. And we're going to look at the different dialogue that they use and see how that helps us understand these characters a little bit more. We can start seeing some of their character traits, which is something that we talked about before in our comprehension lesson. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the dialogue that Roderick uses and that Greg uses, and we're going to chart them and see what type of character traits or personalities we get from dialogue. So we're going to go ahead and start with looking at dialogue that Roderick says, and we're going to go ahead and chart some of that on here. Alright, so this is on page 48. I'm going to read a little bit and then we're going to look at the dialogue. It says, "I could tell the sound of Roderick typing was driving Dad totally bananas. On top of that, Roderick would come out of the computer room every 10 minutes and ask Dad some dumb question." So we're looking down here at the dialogue. So Roderick goes, "Where's the space bar again?" So based off of this type of dialogue that we have for Roderick, there's a couple of things that we can kind of get about his character trait or personality or the way that the reader sees this character. Some of us, while we read this book, we might say that maybe Roderick is not the smartest because he's not sure where the space bar is. Some people might think that maybe he's sneaky or manipulative because he's trying to trick his dad. Like, "Oh, I don't know where the space bar is." And he might know where the space bar is, but he just wants to try to trick his dad into helping him complete his project. So I'm going to go ahead and take this dialogue sentence here and we're going to put it on our anchor chart. And then underneath of this dialogue, I'm thinking that Roderick is trying to be sneaky because I'm thinking that he wants his dad to help him with this report because Roderick is an older high schooler, so he should know how to work the computer. So now we're going to go ahead and move to Greg and do one quote from Greg. So this is our anchor chart for Greg. Alright, so I'm going to read a little bit of page 2 and I'm going to show you some of the dialogue that we use. It says, "Our family didn't go anywhere or do anything fun, and that's Dad's fault. Dad made me join the swim team again, and he wanted to make sure I didn't miss any meets this year." So this is the dialogue that we're looking here. So we have this lady here, she's like, "Kill him, Brandon," and she's obviously cheering on her son. And then this one's saying, "No mercy, Todd," kind of talking about this guy here. And then Greg is over there chattering, you know, how teeth chatter when they're cold. And Greg's dad says, "Stop shivering, Greg." So out of this, I can kind of tell that maybe Greg is either not as competitive or maybe he's just not athletic. Like some of these other kids too are positioned in a way that they're ready to jump in to the water, they're ready to race. Parents are encouraging them to get ready. while Greg is kind of not in that athletic stance, and he's not in that competitive stance that the other two are. So we're going to go ahead and post that dialogue for Greg, and then we're going to figure out what this shows as Greg's character or his character trait. So I talked about he could be not as competitive, or that maybe he's just not athletic. I'm going with, I think that he's just not athletic because the way that he's kind of standing, and you know, his dad is like, stop shivering. Most people who are athletic usually aren't, you know, acting that way. They're more engaged with the sport. So I'm going to say that that makes Greg a little bit more non-athletic. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and look at another quote, another dialogue strip that Roderick has said. And this is also a great example of how dialogue doesn't always have to be long sentences, or it doesn't have to be a big chunk of text. It can be very simple as this one. So this is on the very first page, and it says, "But remember how I said that if a jerk caught me carrying a book with diary written on the cover, they were going to get the wrong idea? Well, that's exactly what happened today." So we look here, and then there's an arrow pointing my brother Roderick. Roderick's punching him, and there's like a punch dialogue there. And then he's like, "Sissy," and Greg is falling to the ground. So based off of what we see here, what type of character trait or characteristic do we get from this image about Roderick? Go ahead and pause the video and think about what that might mean for him as a character. To me, this means that I think that Roderick is maybe a little bit mean, punching his brother, calling him a sissy. I think that that's just something that a mean older brother might do. So I think that that would be a mean characteristic that he has. But there might be a different interpretation that you had, and that is totally okay. So now we're going to look more at Greg's dialogue. So this is on page 127. I'm going to read a little bit. It says, "Then I go up to the teacher and say, 'Listen, I just wanted to tell you I have a glass eye, so don't go thinking I'm looking at other people's papers.'" And then they have a little bit of dialogue here. So that's Greg. And the teacher goes, "Okie dokie, thanks for letting me know." And then we continue reading, and it says, "Then during a test, I'd aim my glass eye down at my own paper, and then I'd look at some brainy kid's paper with my real eye." And then there's him looking at this character who apparently knows all the answers. So looking at this dialogue going on here, we can draw some things about the character of Greg, even though there's he doesn't do any talking throughout this. So what I want you to do is pause the video and think of what type of character trait or what this means about Greg, just through this scene right here and the dialogue that is used between him and the teacher. When I look at this dialogue scene, I feel like Greg is maybe a little witty, he's creative, because he's thinking about a way to get a better grade, although I do not condone cheating, but he's being very smart because he's thinking of a different way to himself out, essentially. So therefore I would consider him to be more of a creative trait. So now that we've looked at different dialogues between Greg and Roderick, I have a couple things for you to think about. So Roderick's dialogue shows his personality is maybe a little bit more off-putting. He's a little bit more mean, maybe mischievous, while Greg is a little bit more innocent. Maybe he's more witty. He's not as athletic as his dad might wish he was. But try and think of the dialogue. What if the two dialogues switched? What if Greg started talking like Roderick and Roderick started talking like Greg? It wouldn't really match the characters because we've learned so much about their personalities through the way that they talk. So when you create characters in your story, people start learning about their personality, the way that they interact with each other, and the way that they talk out loud to themselves, and actions that they do in your story through your cartoon drawings. So as we look to revise this piece by adding more dialogue and adding some illustrations to it, I want you to think about the personalities that you have for your characters already or that you want to build onto. In the story, so far we have your brother. We have you're showcased as the narrator of the story. It's being told by you. And then we have mention of a couple of your friends, but we don't really know much about them yet because they have not had a lot of dialogue with you. We also know Mr. Mays, which we might have a little bit of dialogue going on there. So when you're thinking about the dialogue that you want to use, think about the personality and character traits of that character. So I first wanted to talk about a way you use dialogue already in the story, and I wanted to talk about the way that you used it and how I think of it in the story. So he said that my mom dropped me off at the bus, and the kids were like a pack of wolves, paper thrown everywhere, spitballs coming on your left, people picking their nose, this is a mess. And you drew a little illustration, and you had some people talking in the background, and then it has you just kind of sitting there, standing in the midst of it all. So some of the dialogue you used was, seats taken, bus driver, can you turn the heat down, I'm dying, there's a person sleeping, so you see the Z's, and then it says, get out of here. So there's a couple of different dialogues that's going on, and then your character isn't saying anything. So I think that that's kind of an indication to your character that he's kind of just chill, going with the flow. He's not engaging with any of the other people on the bus. He's just kind of being there and just doing his thing. The way that you portrayed that character through that dialogue is that he just doesn't really care. He's very laid back, and he's not going to entice or mess with any of the other people on the bus. I want to talk about an area that I think you would do really well with if you would like to add a little bit more dialogue to it, and even you can draw a little illustration like we've been working on. In your story, I really like the scene with your Mr. Mays coming and stopping you and saying that you're late for class. And I think we talked about before how getting detention and being late on your first day of class is a pretty big deal. So I would really like to see maybe a little bit more dialogue with that, and how Mr. Mays said it, his facial expression, and then how you reacted to that situation as well. So in your story it says, it starts at 8:30. What time is it? Oh, it's 8:30. I'm going to be late. Mr. Mays catches me. I have detention after school. So I think a cool dialogue that we could use is between Mr. Mays and your character. So go ahead and pause your video and see if you can think of any dialogue that you can use for your story between Mr. Mays and yourself when you were late for gym class. So this is a lot easier when we're in person because we're able to kind of talk about your story and the type of things that you want to see in your story. But since you're not here, I'm going to kind of give you some ideas that I had. Just a reminder that whatever I think, you don't have to take. This is your story, and I want you to be creative as you can. These were just some ideas that I had to kind of help you if you were really stuck. Mr. Mays, he could be coming up. You could have a video drawing of Mr. Mays, and he say, do you know what time it is? Detention! And then your character, depending on how you want them to be, do you want them to be very calm and they don't say anything, or maybe they just kick the ground and they're like, oh, whatever, and just walk away? Or is your character gonna retaliate back? Are they going to be like, I'm not having detention, it's my first day of school, how dare you? Or will your character get really upset? Maybe he's like, oh, this is the worst day, and maybe he starts to cry. Or maybe he runs into the bathroom and wants to be left alone. Or maybe your character is very sarcastic and he's like, oh, you have detention after school. There's many different ways that your character can respond that will help the reader understand a little bit more about your character. Because if your character responds in a very sad way, maybe we know that he's a little bit more sensitive. If maybe your character is sarcastic back and he's like, well, you have detention, mister, we know that our character is maybe a little bit sarcastic, a little witty. If he lashes out at the teacher and kind of gets mad, we know that he has a little bit of a temper. Maybe he's a little bit more of an angry type of person. So really, however you respond is going to help the reader understand what type of character you have. So to kind of finish up this lesson, I would love to see if you could maybe draw out that scene, you know, use some dialogue, and then maybe draw like a little picture of that scene that's going on. That'd be really cool. Like I said, Roman, I wish that I could be there and help you with this because I know how much you care about the story and how much progress we were making. I hope that you enjoyed this lesson today and that it was helpful. Remember, when we're using dialogue, dialogue helps shape the type of character that we're showing. The characters talking shows relationships and different personalities and character traits. As always, thanks for watching, Roman, and I'll see you later.